You also have a very like sexy voice. Like I could see like calling like a sex line, like 1-800-SEX.
Shh, don't tell anybody. That's how I get my extra income. No.
Yes, you just blew her cover. Damn, let's talk some shit.
It's Polly Siegel
And Victoria Aaron.
two licensed therapists who've spent way too much money on degrees, certifications, and trainings. We both love what we do and couldn't imagine working in any other profession. But we're forced to be serious all the time, and that gets boring. Shit Talking Shrinks discusses important mental health topics, the human experience, and society at large, while poking fun along the way. It won't be all fun and games because after every episode, you'll walk away with tangible tools to navigate life more effectively.
We love a tangible tool.
Hi, everyone. We have...
Hello.
Hello. We have an awesome guest, Kerry Rasenberger, who has a fabulous life coaching business and specializes in happiness and self-love and valuing self-worth and doing the hard work to really cultivate those practices and embodiment. And we're so happy to have you.
Yay, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here and to talk something I'm so passionate about and share this. And we can hopefully give some good tips to people struggling, in a toxic relationship. I'm just grateful to be here. So thank you for having me.
You also have a very like sexy voice. Like I could see like calling like a sex line, like 1-800-SEX.
Shh, don't tell anybody. That's how I get my extra income. No.
Yes, you just blew her cover.
I've been told that. Matter of fact, some podcasts keep having me come back and they're like, it's because your voice.
Yes, you have a great voice. Great voice.
I don't know. Just something I've been born with, I guess.
You know how many packs of cigarettes that people smoke to get like that? Like I scream at concerts to get that raspy. Like that's my favorite is when my voice is raspy.
One thing I love about what I do is working. I work with a lot of women on happiness, finding if there's one thing in common most people have is the desire to be happy, right? And we all have different struggles. We all go through a lot of crap in life, and learning how to work through it and whatever you're challenged with and overcoming it and finding yourself and embracing who you are and loving yourself. It took me a long time. If I would have learned what in my 20s, what I know now in my 50s, holy cow, I would have been dangerous. Just knowing that what I know and caring for myself and truly having compassion and caring about my happiness and well-being, it allows you naturally to set boundaries, right? You all had a great podcast on setting boundaries that I listened to, and that just kind of comes naturally in developing yourself and that true self-love. And the only thing I want to clarify about self-love, it kind of is that trendy word, right? That, all the magazines and stuff are taking a little bit of the meaning away. And what self-love, if you look it up in an old English dictionary, is regards to your well-being and happiness. Why the heck shouldn't we all have that? Right? Why shouldn't we have that compassion? But we aren't taught that, right? We aren't taught that when we were kids. Oh, don't do that. You'll be conceited. Or that guilt if you brag too much. That guilt that was always put on me as a kid. And it's one of the most truly important things that I've learned that I hope others will learn to be able to embrace who they are and be happy with their strengths, their weaknesses, and everything in between. I got tons in between, right? And just to be happy with that.
Oh, it's so powerful what you're saying.
It just means the world. And that's what, when I'm working with women, I know we're here today to talk about toxic relationships. And that could be another whole huge podcast on itself. But just a little overview of toxic relationships. I've been in tons. I've lost myself in them. I've lost my identity. I lived in autopilot. I lived on being the number one people pleaser, of trying to make everybody else happy, exhausting my soul, beating myself up, not liking myself, all for a relationship to try to get validation from somebody that was abusing me. And abuse is hard for people to accept, right? We got the financial abuse, you got physical abuse. And I just want to say one more thing about physical abuse. It's not just being hit. You could be with a toxic person and it's the intimidation of them scaring the crap out of you, driving in a car, trying to slam it up against another. You're crying, they're trying to do it, and they get that control and that power because they're scaring you or intimidating you. That's physical abuse. You got the financial, they control financial. You don't have any, the psychological, the emotional, and all of that abuse when you're living in autopilot so many times in these toxic relationships. And you just are like, well, if I try a little harder, maybe I can fix it. Right? Or if I try to be a better wife, I'm not doing this enough. I'm not being enough for that person. And if you got those feelings that you're feeling you're not being enough, listen to your gut. If you got those feelings, something wrong is just not happening. It doesn't feel right. Listen to your gut, because that is you saying, okay, something's wrong. This is an abusive relationship. And I use the word toxic a lot when I'm working with people in the beginning, because it's really hard to admit I'm a smart, intelligent, athletic woman that played sports, did this. How could I go decades? I have women that have been decades in these relationships and not even realize it and tolerate it.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what a toxic relationship is first before we get into healing. Because I know myself, when I was in one, I didn't realize that. I would have never said, oh, I'm in an abusive relationship. No way. I would never allow myself to do that. And that's what we think, right? And these could be learned patterns from childhood, which is another whole generational trauma. That's a whole nother podcast. But the patterns that we do is so important to be aware of. And these are things I was never taught.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard because I'm listening to you, right? And I'm a year out of a 7.5-year relationship. A lot of that was toxic. A lot of that was really, really me bleeding myself dry every single fucking day, and wanting to die every day for 3 years and just completely empty, cortisol levels 1,000, just like, and it's like, I'm listening to you tell my story. Right. And I'm sitting here, and the thing that you said that has brought me the most peace in this year of healing was, I'm not blaming myself. And I want everybody who's listening to hear that. I do not blame myself, but what I have done is I've looked at my part and my patterns. I've looked at the mistakes that I made over time that allowed me to be put in a position where every single day I was bleeding myself dry. And it's from my childhood. Right? It's from what I've been taught by society. If I just do it differently, if I just wear makeup, if I just make more money, if I just make him dinner, then he'll love me. And it's like, you know what, Victoria, like, you have to go inside and love yourself. You have to love yourself. And I didn't.
And I'm so glad that you're sharing that, because there's so many out there that are struggling. And one word I use a lot with clients, everybody comes in with different places, right, of where they're at in their journey. But a lot of them, it's kind of almost right out of the textbook of the pain, losing the self-worth, not having motivation, being the people pleaser, tolerating, being miserable in life, struggling, and it's hard to even get out of bed, right? And a lot of I have kind of 2 words that are big words for me, is awareness. The first one's awareness, right? And just like you said, got to be aware of your patterns, which is so important. But even in the awareness, when somebody doesn't realize the toxic person can have a lot of narcissistic traits, right? We can't go diagnosing somebody with narcissistic personality disorder. However, out of the textbook, if they have 15 out of the 20 traits, they got a lot, right? And to be aware, but it's even in the beginning, being aware of what happens to you physically when you get triggered. I asked somebody, what triggers you? I don't know. Well, what do you get? Do you feel like you're walking on eggshells, right? Do you feel like, oh my goodness, he's going to come home, so I'm going to be at the kitchen table looking like I'm doing something? Because if I'm watching TV, then I'm going to get yelled at, and that is really heavy for somebody that's doing that every day for a decade, right? It's the pattern. So when you get home, it's, well, he's coming home. What is the trigger? Okay, the trigger of him coming home. What's happening in your body? Well, my palms get sweaty. My neck gets tense. I start my heartbeat starts palpitating. I start getting nervous. And that a lot of times being aware of physically what's happening before it even goes into our brain and our thoughts. And then we're on that hamster wheel that we can't stop thinking of those terrible thoughts that just beats us down. That's starting your awareness, right? Start writing your triggers down. What happens physically? Then what goes into your thoughts? And from your thoughts, what are the feelings that you're creating that creates into the action? And in the action, if you're working with a therapist, let them tell you, is that going into the freeze mode? Is that going into the fight mode? And sometimes the great experience I love seeing is when I'm working with a client and they're working with a trauma therapist at the same time. And I can talk to the therapist every once in a while to understand the techniques and things they're working. So we have two people coming together to help this person to overcome, to get more support. And awareness is huge, right? Just like you said, and I'm bringing it up again, but awareness of your patterns. What are the awareness of what you're doing every day? What are you avoiding every day? What are you, how are you reacting? And that really is starting to get you an understanding. I'm in an abusive relationship, right?
Right.
What is the awareness that you have with your financial abuse? You have no control. You can't go to the bank. You have to ask. You're afraid to ask for money, right? The different areas. What is the manipulation? Are you being blamed all the time? Are you being projected onto the anger?
I want to take a quick pause to talk about our sponsor, a company called BetterHelp. It's an online therapy platform where all the therapists are licensed and accredited professionals. It's affordable. You pay a low flat fee for therapy with your therapist, and it's convenient. Do it at your own time and at your own pace, and you can communicate with your therapist as much as you want and whenever you feel is needed. And more importantly, it's effective. Thousands of people have benefited from therapy using BetterHelp, and we're really grateful to offer all of our listeners 10% off your first month. So if you're interested in receiving therapy ASAP, click the link in our show notes and you can get started. And you get to save money. I would say that this conversation and this topic is so much more in Victoria's wheelhouse than it is my own. So I'm being the naive, maybe, or curious person in this conversation. When we say toxic, is that synonymous with abuse?
I use toxic a lot because I feel that the narcissistic is such a trendy word, and I don't want to take it away someone with a relationship that is really with a narcissistic personality disorder. It's not fair for them to take it away because it is brutal. It's a brutal existence living with someone. So a toxic is an unhealthy relationship, a relationship that's not functioning, not loving, where you could be devalued, you could be disrespected.
Yeah, I think also, there was one, so I was the financial provider for 4.5 years in my relationship. And somebody said to me, a good friend said to me, you were being financially abused. And I was like, wait, what? And I could swallow toxic. Toxic is fine. That's palatable. But for somebody to say I was being abused, I was like, oh shit, what? Like, I'm smart. I'm successful. My parents love me. I have, it's like, what do you mean? But when you sit down and you look at the objective black and white fact, right? I was being abused.
Mm-hmm.
So in your mind, is that the same thing? When we say toxic, does that denote abuse? Or is there ever a time where it's toxic without abuse?
It's a really good question. I mean, in my mind, I think it's a different grade. But if you really sit with the facts, you'll probably come to find that there's abuse.
I think you can have two toxic people that just fight all the time, right? And that can be toxic on that stance. But when you have a one-sided relationship that's toxic, more than likely you're going to have some form of abuse in there, whether if it's financial, emotional, physical. With that one-sided relationships, there's nothing healthy about a one-sided relationship, period.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for defining that, because I think a lot of people, because the word abuse has such a jarring effect, whereas toxicity maybe hits a little bit lighter. I just wanted listeners to be able to understand the differences between the word and how they self-conceptualize this conversation.
Well, and this is important because what I was just talking about, I'm saying it in a few minutes, right? But this whole discovery of awareness could take weeks, months, 6 months to get in, years to get in of just the awareness. I'm not even talking about the next phase of healing, right? And is there really phases of healing? Because you can heal, you can develop, you can have, a trigger and you go back 10 steps, and that's okay, because that's all what it's about, right? There's something that that's what part of it's about, is that if you're having that trigger, then there's some part that you're still suffering with that hasn't been dealt with.
I was just going to say, like, it's so interesting. I'm noticing in my body, like, how much I'm shifting. I'm moving my chair back and forth because it's something that I'm only a year out of. And I've made so much progress and I've done so much healing, and still, like, reflecting on the brutality of what I was experiencing and how much I lied to everyone around me is really hard still to cope with. Is like, I protected my relationship at all costs. I did everything inside of me, and it's like, I'm thinking about this healing process, and I can see years back, right? So like 2 years before I left the relationship, I started Olympic lifting. A year before I left the relationship, I opened my own business. Like, there are so many things that I see that led me to the moment where I was in a place that made sense spiritually, physically, emotionally, to make the call of, I have to get the fuck out. But I didn't have that awareness.
Mm-hmm. It takes a while.
It takes a while.
And even when you start getting that awareness, it doesn't happen really fast, because you can have the trauma bonding, right? And not only that, you have your body, you're fighting inside of painting that picture of what you thought was real, the way you justified it, right? And doing that. So sometimes what I'll do with clients is we talk about what's real. What did you tolerate that was abusive and not right? Or I might use the word in the beginning that was unhealthy. And to have a list of what is unhealthy behavior. I was disrespected. I was lied to. I was blamed for everything. I was manipulated. I never had a say. I never had financial control. I wasn't allowed to do anything. Wasn't allowed is huge hit. Wasn't allowed, right? And that's very common. Everything I'm saying is common with many people that go through this. So writing a list of what I don't like using the word fantasize, but what you make up in your mind of your story versus what the real story is a good go-to, because sometimes what happens when you're leaving a toxic relationship, These people are master manipulators. They can wear so many disguises. If one way of manipulation isn't working, they will try coming in with a nice, smooth charisma. And you start thinking, oh, maybe he's changed. Oh my gosh, maybe I'm the one that's wrong and I'm being oversensitive and I'm not being right. And maybe I need to give him another chance. And we'll talk through that, because what will happen, I have never had it not so far. Doesn't mean things aren't impossible. They always turn back to their old ways and the true color comes out again. So what I'll say is, when they are being nice, what are they manipulating you for? What is the underlying reason that you're seeing kindness to pull you back in? Right? And just like if you seek closure, seeking closure, you'll never get from someone that has a lot of narcissistic traits. You'll never get closure. There's never, ever. So when you seek closure, what it does, it pulls you right back into the abusive cycle, and you're wrapped right back in. And if you look at going back to patterns, you'll see you do the same thing, very similar, for years. I mean, I have some incredible women that are just, they're just beautiful. And they've done this for decades. We're talking some 26, 27 years.
Victoria, I was sort of watching your face as Kerry was describing things, and it felt like there was a lot of the gears were turning. I'm just curious your thoughts.
I'm reflecting on, the last year, right? And I said this in a podcast that Paulina and I were guests on last week, but I saw my ex like a year to the day after I left the relationship we were in the same environment. Like, it just was all happenstance. And I was so grateful, because when I left him this time, right? Like, we weren't dating, we haven't, whatever, but we just saw each other. I didn't have that same attachment. And I think the reason I didn't have that same attachment is because of the joy and self-love and self-worth and all of the things that I've gained in the last year from leaving, and it was like it was so freeing. And how it's so hard for me, because Paulina and I met right when I was leaving the relationship. So she doesn't know this. Nobody knows the extent of how fucking miserable, I was darkness. I was sitting next to somebody at the nail salon yesterday. She was like, "You're like a ray of light. That's who I'm meant to be. That's who the universe intended me to be." But I was like just a dark hole, an empty vessel of a person, like moving through life. And now, like, I'm so full of it, and it's like, it's just, everything you're saying is hitting me so deeply, because I can't believe I was in that place for so long. I'm so grateful I never harmed myself. I'm so grateful I didn't relapse. I've been sober for 11 years. I'm so grateful, because everything I went through, it for a layman, it feels like enough to get fucked up. It feels like enough to kill yourself. It feels like enough to be in self-harm.
And it's hard, if people haven't experienced toxic relationships, to understand how broken they can do and break your heart and crush you, who you are, and take your soul. They just drain you, right? So that awareness is huge. But then you go through processes of dealing with resentment, dealing with shame, dealing with guilt. I mean, we could talk hours about this. There's so much, but I think one area, and this takes a lot of time, but I think one area that's really hard is acceptance, right? It's coming to the point that you accept that you were in an abusive relationship. And that mine goes back years ago, but still to believe and to know, sometimes even for me, I was abused. I was abused by my father, who was like some smart engineer man. And I was abused by boyfriends in high school, and it's the pattern. And I'm a smart go-getter, non-stopping person. It's like, and it's kind of like, how the heck could I allow myself to do that? And so coming to acceptance and letting go resentment, because resentment's only hurting you, it doesn't hurt them, right? And if you have kids together, you can go through resentment of, oh, now he's putting on the great father role, which he never was. But now he's like buddying up with the kids and doing things with the kids. And that's hard resentment to go through on that. So acceptance is huge step of accepting that, okay, it was my past. Okay, this is what I experienced, but I'm kicking butt because I'm doing so much better and getting into more of the healing. Was acceptance hard for you, Victoria?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a brutal, like my 2 A's are awareness and acceptance, I think are two. I mean, there's so much in between, but I think acceptance is huge.
Because I had been so protective of the relationship and because I was lying, right? I was lying. If I really look at what I was doing, you know, to reflect certain things to like somebody like Paulina or our other friend Marnie or people in my life where I would say something and they would be like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? How, and to hear that reflected back to me, right? It's like starting to share my story and what I experienced really allowed me more acceptance because the people in my life who I love and trust and was developing really strong relationships with were so shocked.
Yeah.
By like the smallest things. Not the really, just not the glaring shit, but like the small things where they would be like, what the fuck do you mean?
It's hard to explain sometimes too, because I think the manipulation that you go through, it's sometimes hard to even relay it because people don't believe it. They see a different person. They see a different person than what you experience because what goes on inside is so different than what goes on outside. But for me, it was very liberating because I did the same. I kind of hid it. I wanted everyone to think I was happy. I wasn't weak. I wasn't, the happy, upbeat person on the outside. But then in the inside, and I have to say, it starts to be liberating talking the truth. And talking the real story and seeing the truth and accepting the truth, it also gives you the ability to find closure within because you're not going to get it with that person. We already mentioned that, but to start getting closure within and to go to yourself to be your safety point, right? For your self-validation. Because so many times I think many stay in a toxic relationship seeking that validation is one reason. There's a long list of others. But going to yourself for that validation. And that's where I love working with clients on the self-love of really working on that. Because once you start putting yourself first, everything else kind of comes along with it, right? Knowing your worth. Because I'll tell you this right now, we're all born worthy. Nobody's worthy than somebody else. We're all worthy. And the only day we lose that worthiness is when we give it away to somebody.
Yeah, so I want to segue into tangible tools because I think that's exactly what you're getting at is like if you do choose to leave a relationship, let's go with the path of like you've left and you're healing and you're trying to recalibrate from the horrendous experience you've endured. What are the steps for people to start to heal in both of your guys' opinion?
Well, for me, I think just learning to love myself again. Because when you get to that point, you don't really care about yourself. And I'll tell you one first sign that you're losing yourself is when you lose self-care. You aren't getting up and showering. You aren't putting on nice clothes. And self-care is going for a walk in the woods and all that. It's like self-love is an umbrella, right? And then underneath it, you have self-kindness, you have self-worth, you have self-care and all of that. And when you start realizing and writing down, what do I need in life to make me happy? Okay. What do I value in life? After a toxic relationship, your values have gone out the door because they've been sucked out. So really start looking at, first of all, what you value. Sometimes I'll do for fun, do a 7-minute fun brain download of everything you like. And if you start overthinking and it freezes you, then don't do it then because do it. Just write everything you like and then go back and circle 2 things that you find the most passionate today and start doing that. And I think living in the present moment helped me a lot where our past, we can't change our past. We can't control our future. You can plan, but you can't control what's actually going to The only thing in life, what I've really learned is I can control this moment, and living in the moment and being passionate for what I'm doing and doing what I like has been some really good stepping stones, and also finding patience with myself in the healing process.
For our viewers that aren't watching, I'm getting emotional because I'm just thinking about, a week out of leaving the relationship. I was walking, I think like 8 miles a day. And I was just like, I would stop and I would weep. And then I would have a client call, and then I would walk and I would weep and I would have a client call. And like, all I could do was move my body. Like I had to walk, and it was like my way of like processing everything. And, it was so interesting because I feel like when somebody asks you, like, how do you cultivate self-love? It's just it's so broad, but when it like really comes down to it, it's like, I ask myself, like, who do I love the most in this world? And like, what would I do for them? And then like give that to myself, or on the other side of things, because I am a spiritual person, like if the universe loves me more than I could ever comprehend, what would it want for me? And so then I would really, because my love ideal was so fucked. My love ideal was like, I will tie myself up by my feet. I will cut myself open. I will bleed myself dry just to prove that I deserve for you to wash the fucking dishes. So my idea of love was too tainted. And so to imagine like something out there loves me more than I could ever know, more than my parents, more than my grandparents, more than anything on this earth. And what would it want for me? It would want for me to eat good food. It would want for me to move my body. It would want for me to laugh with my friends. It would want for me to buy myself shit. It would want for me all these things that I never gave to myself. I never fucking gave that to myself. And now I got the car of my dreams. I get the shit that I want. I do whatever the fuck I want when I want it now. And I love it. I love it. And I bring people along with me to do the same thing, It's so cool. This is such a cool moment.
When you think about the moment it ends and how you carve your path forward and how you begin to prioritize vitality, wellness, health, as I understand it, as I'm learning today, it's like, know your values, write down what matters to you most, write down the things that bring you joy and love and happiness. Ask yourself, like, if the universe were to treat me as a goddess, what would the universe want for me? And then how do I embody that and live it wholeheartedly? It's like getting really clear of, how do I reestablish my identity as this new human? Because you really become, as I understand it, this new human that you're trying to reorient and find your groove. But how could you do that unless you understood your values, the things that bring you joy and passion, treating yourself like you're a Ferrari, like taking like such good care of yourself, and starting to carve your path forward as an empowered woman? Because I know a lot of what we're talking about impacts women. And so how did I do, ladies? Did I get the essence of what you guys were saying?
You got it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
And one of the things my best friend says to me, because I think one of the things that I've done in the last year is I led a lot with my body, right? So like I encountered a lot of men sexually to kind of prove my worth, and then I stopped doing that because I was like, this doesn't even fucking feel good. I don't want to do this anymore. And what my friend said to me, she said, "You are a weapon. Refine yourself." She's like, refine yourself. Like, and of course that might be, you know what I mean? It's like, and not in like I'm not a weapon in like a violent way, but I'm a weapon in like, I am fully equipped. I have it all. Refine myself.
I love it. I do too. It's like a rediscover of a true self when you come out. And I liked how you talked about the first week, because that's tough. And I think sometimes the first few weeks, it could be the first few months, make simple goals I'm a big believer in baby steps. When we try to do too much, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And even if it's to get out of bed and take a shower, be proud of yourself for doing it. And I had one client, she came so far, and we had so much fun with this. And she had so much personal growth, and I just wanted to hug her through the Zoom, right? and I'm like, let's go. And I said, go get yourself a cake and write what you want to write on it. And I'm like, what do you want to write? Do you want to write congrats? Do you want to write I love myself? And the best thing, it gave me goosebumps. She took a picture. She went out and got a cake, wrote a great message for her success of coming so far and loving herself more. And she texted me a picture of a cake. And I was like, that is so freaking cool, But those small little joys of what we do for ourselves in the healing process is so important, because all those little steps sometimes are more difficult, because once we get going, taking a big step becomes much easier in the process.
Momentum.
Oh yeah, the momentum. But there's hope out there for everybody. So if anybody is stuck, know that there's so many other people that have experienced. Get help, right? Get a good therapist, get a coach, get one that specializes in working with, survivors of, I don't like to say victims, because we're way more than a victim. We're their target. We are survivors, and we are stronger, and we are not unstoppable now in loving ourselves more.
Oh, and on that note, on that gorgeous note,
we love you. Big, big love, the biggest.
Catch everyone later.